Today we will be covering some of the Milgram study, which is part of the social approach in AS psychology syllabus. Now, this study is typically meant to explore the individual and the situational factors of what causes behaviors. So, Milgram wanted to see whether atrocities like the World War II Holocaust caused by Germans, if they could be explained by situational factors instead of individual, which means that could we instead place the blame on the social pressures or on the authority rather than the individual people. So we wanted to see if given the same sort of authoritative and pressure situation, would Americans be willing to commit similar atrocities like the Germans did? Because obedience is a behavior that's been typically ingrained in many social settings or societies unless you live in isolation. So, obeying your teacher, a police officer, someone who's at a higher authority than you, we're always told to obey adults. And morals, we're also going to be discussing moral strain. Moral strain is when you're doing something against your own principles. You're still doing it, but if you are at a conflict with yourself or with your own person. So, what is the individual or the situational explanation for behavior? The individual explanation of behavior states that majority of the causes or reason for our behavioral changes come from within ourselves. Internalized decisions. You get up early because you like to get up early. Situational factors, on the other hand, say there are factors about the situation or setting around you that cause your behavior. So something like you got up early because there was some shouting in the next room, so it woke you up, or because you have to get up for school. So you see the difference? The aim of the study was to see the highest level of an electric shock that our participants would be willing to provide to a helpless man if they were asked to do so by an experimenter in his laboratory. Notice how his laboratory is in all caps? It's because it signifies the authority. So if a legitimate authority figure asks you to do something that usually goes against your principles, so this will cause a moral strain because as children, we have always been instructed to obey authority, but we have also been instructed to not harm people. So there will be a conflict, and we want to see the level of obedience that will result from this. So the basic procedure of the study was that we gave our participants a fake aim. We told them that the study was about the learning and memory. We told them it was about the consequences of punishment on learning. This minimizes the demand characteristics and makes them less suspicious. It also enhances ecological validity because it makes the study more realistic or believable to them. So, this has been called a lab experiment by the researcher Milgram. However, it is not one because there is no IV, there is no DV, there is no experimental design. There is only the people who will be asked to perform a specific task. So, there are no IV levels, so we can call it an interview and an observation that was conducted in a laboratory environment. So we have two stooges or two confederates that will be our learner as well as the man who is posing as our experimenter. The man who is posing as our experimenter is a 32-year-old biology teacher and he has a stern manner. And our learner is also an Irish American man who is well likable. It was important that our learner was well likable, so you can imagine if the learner was, for example, someone that was frustrating or annoying, then we would reduce validity because our participant might just shock him because they're upset by him, right? So the study was conducted in a fancy laboratory in the Yale University campus. Now notice how Yale University is also very important here. It's another situational factor that we will get to know because like I said, Yale University is prestigious, it signifies authority and the legitimacy of the experiment increases. So the participant will believe that the university knows best or that they are very educated and that they know better, right? So our sample consists of 40 American males that we collected through volunteer sampling. So we put out an advertisement asking for these, and we also said we would pay them. So we would give them a payment of $4 as well as 50 cents, which would be the traveling fare. So the age range was 20 to 50 years old, and we specified that we wanted a wide range of occupations like clerks, salesmen, high school teachers, and engineers. The wide variety of occupations ensures that our study would be generalizable because there will be no one particular occupation that is more obedient than others. So this was the advertisement that was put out. So again, it says that the people need it for a study of memory. So coming to the apparatus that we used, this is very important. The most important apparatus that was used was the shock generator, which was made to look very realistic. It is a fake shock generator, however. It was made to look realistic so the participant would believe that the experiment is legitimate. And so there is a brief description of the shock generator. So it had 30 lever switches, one for each level of shock. So the shocks range from 15 volts to all the way to 450 volts, and they were signified with the following danger levels. So slight shock, moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, and at the end, the final two shocks were labeled as simply XXX. There was so the red lights would light up every time the shock was pressed, and there would be a blue button that would indicate the energy levels, and there will be a buzzing noise, and it will sound very realistic. It was industrially engraved with the name Shock Generator Type ZLB, Dyson Instrument Company, to make it seem all the more realistic. So each subject was also given a sample shock of 45 volts. This was done to make them again believe the experiment more and make them understand more clearly the kind of pain that the learner would be in. So the so we give them a hat with two pieces of paper, both of them say teacher. So we tell the part, and each trial is conducted individually, mind you. So both the learner and the teacher are told that one of them will take one position each. So our participant picks up a slip of the paper and it says teacher. So our participant will always be the teacher in the situation, and our learner, who is the stooge, So the learner, so we watch the learner getting strapped into a fake electrical chair, and we tell them that the strap is to minimize movement when there is discomfort, and there is also an electrode attached to their wrist, and we also put electrode paste and tell them that it's to prevent burns of any kind. Again, this is all contributing to the validity and realism of the experiment. So this is what the typical setup looked like. So this is our experimenter, this is the teacher or our participant, and in the adjacent room is our learner. So you can imagine he can't see him, but he can hear him. So the task was that our participant would read out a word pair, and then read out a bunch of words, and then the learner would have to indicate what was the original word that was paired. So this is again as was given the fake aim a test of memory. So our participant thinks that this is the thing that is being tested, the effective punishment on these answers. But in reality, it is the participant's own behavior that is being observed. Each of the learner's responses were predetermined. He would have a ratio of 3 incorrect answers to 1 correct answer. Using the pilot studies, we realized that it would be a pretty complicated sort of task to master. So we had a preliminary run where we had given our participant a list of 10 words to read out, just so they can sort of master or get the hang of this entire procedure. So, and the instructions they were given was to increase the shock level by 15 volts every time the answer gets wrong, right? So they start off from 15 volts, and if they give another wrong answer, they move on to 30 volts, and so on and so forth. Almost all the subjects ended up doing the preliminary run really well, right? So then they moved on to the secondary run, which was really the one that we were actually observing or counting, right? And we instructed them to start from 15 volts again. So again, it ranged from 15 volts to 450 volts, and the increment was from 15 volts. No, so if the learner failed to answer, that was also counted as an incorrect answer, and each incorrect answer was again shocked. So they had to wait 10-15 seconds, and if there was still no response, then they shocked them. So after the 300-volt shock, the learner was told to pound on the adjacent wall, so the wall that they were both sharing. He would pound on it and then it would not respond. And again, after the 315-volt shock, he would pound, and then after that, he would fail to respond entirely. So he stops responding. Again, this has made them to believe that it's very painful, but throughout the experiment, we kept reassuring the participant that although the shocks are extremely painful, they won't cause any lasting or permanent tissue damage. So sometimes what our participant did was that he was obviously very hesitant because of the moral strain and the inner conflict that we mentioned. So to encourage the participant to go on, the experimenter would use certain prods. These are designed to keep the participant in the experiment, and you can see how they would sort of cause a pressure on him. So the prods were administered in the following sequence. So please go on, followed by the experimenter requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue, and you have no other choice. You must go on. So prod 2 was administered only if 1 was unsuccessful, 3 was administered only if 2 was unsuccessful, and you get the hang of it. So, and each time the prods were administered, they were administered in the same sequence from scratch. So sometimes there was also a special prod. It was told them to that shocks might be painful, but there will be no permanent tissue damage, so please go on. And this was followed by the second prod. They were used if participants showed any signs of disobedience or reluctance. And every participant that withdrew before the 30th level would be called a disobedient participant, and every participant that followed till the end would be called our obedient participant. And we also used a magnetic tape to record certain sessions, as well as we had observers. So you can call this a non-participant, covert, and controlled observation.